Welcome to class. We'll be reviewing the Modern Carpentry book by Wagner and Smith, 2003 edition. The point that we're going for here is to review for a quiz that's going to be online through Google Forms. Same format as a safety quiz. These are the items that are coming up for the week, so just review Google Classroom and look for the directions for those. We're going to review the textbook and go through the year so that we just get all the information on an online content format. Chapter 1, Building Materials. Many different types of materials go into the construction of modern residence. A carpenter should be familiar with all of these materials. Each has special properties that make it suited for certain building applications. Before being used in construction, materials are treated to improve their quality. Some are composites of different materials, which are designed to do a certain job better than a natural material. Construction materials include sawed lumber, engineered lumber, plywood, particle board, hardboard, wafer board, wood and non-wood materials for shingles and flooring, steel and aluminum, metal fasteners, concrete, adhesives and sealers, gypsum board, and other interior coverings. Next section, lumber. Wood is one of the greatest natural resources. When it is cut into pieces uniform in thickness, width, and length, it becomes lumber. This material has always been widely used for residential construction. Lumber is the name given to natural or engineered products of the sawmill. Lumber includes boards used for flooring, sheathing, paneling, and trim, dimension lumber used for sills, plates, studs, joists, rafters, and other framing members, timber used for posts, beams, heavy stringers, and what we're doing with the scale model house project is we're actually recreating smaller versions of types of lumber that you would be able to find at a lumber yard or hardware store. Carpenters must have a good working knowledge of lumber. They must be familiar with kinds, grades, sizes, and other details to properly select and use lumber. To understand how to handle and treat wood, carpenters should also know something about its growth, structure, and characteristics. If you have questions about lumber, please talk to the employees at the lumber yard or the hardware store that you're going to get your lumber, and that really ensures that you know what you're buying, and if you need some help figuring out what materials are the best, just describe the process and bring any little plans that you have or sketches, and then that can really start a conversation in which you get a lot of support because these support personnel want you to buy their products, and you'll develop a relationship with them over time. Next section, wood structure and growth. Wood is made up of long, narrow tubes called fibers or tracheids. The cells are no larger around than a human hair. Their length varies from about 1/25 of an inch for hardwoods to approximately 1/8 of an inch for softwoods. Tiny strands of cellulose make up the cell walls. The cells are held together with natural cement called lignin. This cellular structure makes it possible to drive nails and screws into the wood. It also accounts for the light weight, low heat transmission, and sound absorption qualities of the wood. The growing parts of a tree are the tip of the roots, the leaves, and a layer of cells just inside the bark called cadmium. Different types of leaves are shown in the figure in the book. To summarize this, you should, when you get comfortable with looking at different types of wood, also know what that tree looks like and also what that leaf pattern looks like. There are many distinct patterns, and so maybe there's, I would say there's probably 12 major categories for farmed lumber. And if you know those, what those 12 trees look like, you can, it will really help you in your building process. Water absorbed by the roots travels through the sapwood to the leaves, where it's combined with carbon dioxide from the air. Through the chemical process of photosynthesis, sunlight changes these elements to a food called carbohydrates. The sap carries this food back to various parts of the tree. Next section, annular rings. Growth in the cadmium layer takes place in the spring and summer. Separate layers form each season. These layers are called annual rings. Each ring is composed of 2 layers, springwood and summerwood. In the spring, trees grow rapidly and the cells produced are large and thin-walled. As growth slows down during the summer months, the cells produced are smaller, thick-walled, and darker in color. These annual growth rings are largely responsible for the grain patterns that are seen in the surface of boards. Sapwood is located inside the cadmium layer. It contains living cells, and they may be several inches thick. Sapwood carries sap to the leaves. The heartwood of the tree is formed as the sapwood becomes inactive. Usually it turns darker in color because of the presence of gum and resin. In some woods, such as hemlock, spruce, basswood, there is little or no difference in appearance of the sapwood and the heartwood. Sapwood is as strong and heavy as heartwood, but is not as durable when exposed to weather. Next section, kinds of wood. Lumber is either softwood or hardwood. These are the main classifications. Softwoods are appropriate for certain applications, and hardwoods are appropriate for other applications. Hardwood takes a lot longer to grow and is usually more expensive. Softwoods grow rapidly and are not appropriate for all applications. But when you need large lumber, you most likely will be using softwood. What we're using in the scale model house project is pine, specifically number 2 pine. Number 2 refers to the mill quality of the wood, and it is a small, it has small imperfections in it, some knots, and that's the best wood that we can use for the price to accomplish our scale model house project. Softwoods come from the evergreen or needle-bearing trees. These are called conifers because many of them bear cones. See, cones, we most likely would see those in redwoods or sequoias. We definitely see those quite often around here. Hardwoods come from broadleaf deciduous trees that shed their leaves at the end of the growing season. This classification is somewhat confusing because many of the hardwood trees produce a softer wood than some of the so-called softwood trees. Several of the more common kinds of commercial softwoods and hardwoods are listed here in the book. They go through several different types of wood here in the diagram, and some of the most popular hardwoods, just off of the top of my head here, maple, oak, and walnut, mahogany, and then softwoods. We'll just say we have a Douglas fir, we have spruce, ponderosa pine, western red cedar, and redwood. Those are most of the woods that you'll encounter at lumberyard. A number of hardwoods have large pores in the cellular structure and are called open grain woods. They require additional operations during finishing. Different kinds of wood will also vary in weight, strength, workability, color, texture, grain pattern, and odor. Study the full color wood sample at the end of this unit as a first step in wood identification. Just to be clear, we'll look at woods in an identification method. I'll have some small pieces of different varieties of wood, and then we will work to identify them on site by the grain pattern that they have. To further develop the ability to identify woods, study actual specimens. Several of the softwoods used in construction work are similar in appearance. Considerable experience is required to make accurate identification. I've been looking at different types of wood for a long time, and you don't get it right all the time. There's not an exact way to know which wood is which, unless you see the leaves, or you might know where that wood was harvested from. Some of the grain patterns are similar and can make identification very difficult. Availability of different species or different kinds of lumber varies from one part of the country to another. This is especially true of framing lumber, which is expensive to transport long distances. It is usually more economical to select building materials found in the area. This is super true. We are in the West Coast, so we have access to certain trees here in abundance. On the East Coast, they have access to many, many different trees. And it's not like one is better than the other, but this transportation aspect is just really, really expensive because the wood is heavy. If it's just recently milled and you're going to be transporting it, it's going to be wet. The wet wood weighs quite a bit, and the more things weigh, the more it costs to transport them. Cutting methods. Most lumber is cut so that the annual rings form an angle of less than 45 degrees with the surface of the board. This produces lumber called flat-grained if it is softwood, or plain sawed if it is hardwood. This method produces least waste and the most desirable grain patterns. Lumber can be cut so that angular rings form an angle of more than 45 degrees with the surface of the board. This method produces lumber called edge-grained if it is not softwood, and quarter sawed if it is hardwood. It is more difficult and expensive to use this method. However, it produces lumber that swells and shrinks less across the width and is not as likely to warp. There are many different woods in our particular area here. I can think of specifically eucalyptus. Eucalyptus is a hardwood which would make a great building material if it didn't warp so much as it dried. It just never dries flat. So it's in our area here traditionally used as a firewood. Eucalyptus is also an invasive species. It's not native to California. Moisture content and shrinkage. Before wood can be used commercially, a large part of the moisture must be removed. When a living tree is cut, more than half of its weight might be moisture. Lumber used for framing and outside finish should be dried to a moisture content of 15%. Cabinet and furniture woods are dried to a moisture content of 7 to 10%. The amount of moisture or moisture content, MC, M.C. abbreviation, in wood is given as a percent of the oven dry weight. To determine the moisture content, a sample is first weighed. It is then placed in an oven and dried at a temperature of about 212 degrees Fahrenheit or 100 degrees Celsius. The drying is continued until the wood no longer loses weight. The sample is weighed again, and this oven dried weight is subtracted from the initial weight. The difference is then divided by the oven dry weight. So it's a formula that gives you how much moisture is in the wood. Equilibrium and moisture content. Oh, before I go into equilibrium and moisture content, a tool for selecting the correct type of wood, humidity-wise, is actually a humidity sensor. And you can use this to tell if your wood is ready to use. If it exceeds a certain humidity level, you would be best off waiting for that wood to dry more in certain applications, because the wood will twist and warp and may not be stable because it's not completely dry or within that that dry range, that 7 to 10%. Next section, equilibrium and moisture content. A piece of wood will give off or take on moisture from the air around it until the moisture in the wood is balanced with that in the air. You could consider wood a type of sponge. It's always trying to absorb water because it was originally filled with water and sap. So it tries to pull that atmospheric moisture into itself. At this point, the wood is said to be at equilibrium moisture content. This is abbreviated E.M.C. Since wood is exposed daily and seasonal changes in the